Park Rapids area program, messages from the Central Wisconsin experience for the Park Rapids area, how human activity affects our groundwater. The League of Women Voters is an all-volunteer organization that believes our representative democracy needs informed citizens involved in public decisions. League of Women Voters does not support candidates or political parties, but deals with issues according to a consensus from our members. We offer many ways to be involved and grow your skills. League membership is open to all citizens over 16 years old, male or female. Come join us for specific events, discussions, etc. If you have questions about what League is about, please see one of our members here today or pick up a membership brochure at the sign-in table. And I'd like to preface this with a bit about the League policy. The Minnesota State League of Women Voters supports a state role in the preservation and management of Minnesota's water resources through protection, allocation, conservation, pricing, and interbasin transfer policies protective of Minnesota's current and future needs. And there's more information about both the State of Minnesota and the U.S. League of Women Voter positions on water at the sign-in table. And next, a few housekeeping duties. A reminder, please turn off your cell phones. Bathrooms are down this hall and in the back of this room. Help yourself to refreshments if you've not already done so. Also, please take note of the donation basket on the sign-in table or the treat table. And if you can help to support this kind of programming, please give as you are able. And following the program, we'd really appreciate it if you'd complete an evaluation of our program and leave it on the table, helping us to continue to offer quality programs to the public. We'd like to thank also our information table sponsors. If you've not yet had time to visit each table, please do so after the presentation. The following people are either our table presenters or they arranged for them. Luke Huey of Detroit Lakes from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is actually goose hunting. Can you imagine it? But he has Ryan Parrish, soil scientist from the fertilizer field unit of the Minnesota Department of Ag, coming here from Staples. Ryan has worked with the nitrogen fertilizer management plan and the groundwater protection rule. He guides farmers in nitrogen fertilizer best management practices and cover crops along with other management tools. With him is Kim Kaiser, also with the Minnesota Department of Ag, and she's a hydrologist. The two will provide a table presentation about well testing in Southwest Hubbard County, Becker County, and Southern Wadena counties. She helps to run the township testing statewide. We also have Jay Pilkey from EcoWater, offering information on ways of filtering and treating your water at home. We have Dean Christofferson from the City of Park Rapids, who can answer your questions about the impact of nitrates on our city wells and water supplies. Julie Kingsley is with the Soil and Water Conservation District. She's the manager of that group, which is its own government unit. It is not under Hubbard County, as the supervisors are elected. And then we also have a trifold display done by one of our league members, Anna Mae Holsworth, on groundwater withdrawal and the use of bottled water by companies such as Nestle. I'd like to thank also the people who worked on the committee, Joel Voorhees, Patty Stulik, Florence Hedin, Mary Adams, helped with planning the program, and Carolyn White for designing our publicity, and to the many others who have assisted in setting up the program for this evening. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have two speakers this evening, and George Kraft, Professor Emeritus from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Dr. Kraft is a hydrologist and has been a professor of water resources at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. He continues to do research and advise on policy and provide extension education on groundwater sustainability issues. Dr. Kraft has done 30 years of research on how irrigated farming has affected groundwater quality and quantity in central Wisconsin, an area similar to the Park Rapids area. And then our second speaker will be our local Darrin Hoberson, who's originally from Park Rapids. He's worked for 12 years with the DNR as a hydrologist. He has a deep understanding of this area's water resources. His education includes a bachelor's degree in aquatic biology from St. Cloud State and a master's degree in water resources from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. He is also the project manager for the Straight River Groundwater area. Interesting to note that Darrin and Luke Stewie and Doug and Julie Kingsley's daughter all had George as their instructor at Stevens Point. So I'd like to thank you all for coming and let you know that there will be time for questions following the presentations. And with that, Dr. Kraft.
Good evening. Well, maybe the first thing, right, what's this guy from Stevens Point doing here? Well, you heard already, visiting old friends and alumni from Stevens Point, which has been wonderful. Getting a great tour from Darrin today of this part of the world. And every time I do a travel, I learn more about water management in different places and how our different, we call them subcultures, political systems, deal with our water management problems. So that was really fun today to go see. We spent some time looking at Mississippi headwaters, and I'm snapping all kind of pictures that I hope to use someday. But the overriding purpose that I'm here is was in the mission of the league here. You know, it's democracy. Democracy needs information, and there's no more democratic natural resource, I don't think, than water and water management. Water belongs to all of us. We don't have a system in Minnesota or Wisconsin or much of the Midwest where there's an ownership of the water resource. It's a pooled water resource belonging to all of us. And so it's really important for us to learn about water, what it means, and how do we allocate it. You know, how do we use it as a public? How do we use it for private enterprise here? Private enterprise so that people can make livings, people have jobs. These are interesting and complicated questions that we need to be informed about and need to keep our eye on the squirrel where we're going with our water. So with that, let's talk about the Wisconsin Central Sand. I'm sorry, a lot of these are kind of dark. I'm not sure what the reason is, but you know, you may look at this and see, geez, you know, a lot of this landscape looks like ours here. That, you know, we have these broad irrigated farm areas here. We got moraines that border them, and when we look closely, we can see that, you know, we have a lot of. I think we have a lot more little lakes interspersed, if I'm not mistaken, and we have lots of headwater streams here. And so, you know, the proximity of where we have large amounts of water use to where we have large amounts of things that the public values, like lakes, like streams, like fisheries and things. You know, we have to think about managing our water resources carefully here. Now, you know, we're not the same. As Darrin and I were going around today, you know, we could say, okay, we got these similarities, we got these differences. You have a little bit different geology here. You know, our rainfall amounts are a little different. You have a different kind of set of policy and law on your water resources. We probably root for different football teams, right? But anyway, there's also lots of similarities that we can learn from each other. So let's start out with groundwater in the water cycle here. Okay, who knows a lot about groundwater already? A few people are tentatively putting up here. So we'll go through this. So some know a lot about groundwater, and some not so much. Groundwater is part of the water cycle. It's the water beneath the surface of the earth, where all the little spaces between sand grains or cracks in the rock are saturated with soil. So if we go, you know, drill a hole from the surface, somewhere between maybe a foot or two below the surface and maybe as deep as 100 or 200 feet, eventually, you know, we're going to come to a geologic layer where the geologic medium is saturated. And where does it come from? And I hope beer companies are still doing this, talking about it coming from Canada. A lot of our groundwater people say comes from Lake Superior. I don't know what the tail was in this area. Maybe it was from Alaska, who knows. But it comes from local precipitation. In our neck of the woods, we get about 32 inches of rain a year. Darrin was scratching his head. He couldn't remember if it's more like 28 or 32, but we're fairly similar. Really, because we have these really sandy soils that water can soak through pretty well, not much runs directly off the landscape and gets into water. Most of it soaks into the ground and is stored in the soil, at least for a time. Then we got plant roots. Plant roots, as we all know, are taking up water. It's going to the leaves and out into the atmosphere. Our neck of the woods, that ends up being about 20, 22 inches of water is evapotranspired into the atmosphere, which leaves us with about 10 inches that sneaks through the soil, gets to this water table that's the top of the groundwater, and becomes groundwater. Once we have groundwater, and it's in this geology we call an aquifer. Groundwater's sole purpose in life is to get the heck out of the aquifer and get to a stream and get out of that watershed. Okay, so it's flowing. It's flowing from areas where it comes in, where we call recharge areas, to places where it's leaving, which we call discharge areas. Easy peasy. Now imagine we have a feature of the landscape, and it might be 40 acres, it might be 100 acres, it might be 200 acres, but it's where the Earth's topography dips below the top of the groundwater. What might we call that thing?
Lake.
A lake, right. Okay, the next hint is it may have fish in it. Yeah, and so we have to think about these things as a single resource. The groundwater, the lake, and the stream, they're all connected here. We can't just manage them piecemeal. We have to think about them all at the same time. Now, there's, I call it fancy pants groundwater system. The top's a little cut off there. So, and you do have here, you have something that's a little more complicated. We don't in central Wisconsin. We go to the east or the west. We do, but you have multiple aquifers that are separated by, here it says confining them to maybe clay layers or shales or something like that if we're talking about rock. But the same basic principle holds. Water's coming in from the top. It's going through the aquifer. It's trying to get the heck out and get to a stream. It just may take longer when we have more complicated kinds of geology here. Okay, now let's talk about what happens if we add pumping to the equation here. So down here we've added a high capacity pumping well. The first thing you notice as we go from here to down here is that when that well is operating, the water level is coming down, right? This is basic conservation of mass. You don't get anything for free. You're taking water out. You got to be lowering water somewhere where you've been storing it here. And indeed, that's what's going on here. Now, this lowering is kind of tricky. We have places where you put in a new well, and they take 20 or 30 years for that new equilibrium to develop. So it's not like, sometimes people will get confused. You put in a well, you turn it on, and measure it going down. You turn it off and measure it come back up, and conclude that there's been no change. No, there's always a change. There's always a change. And until the system comes to a new equilibrium, that water level may be going down for some time. Now, I hope folks in the back can see it. Hope people in the radio can see it. We have the lake here too, and because the lake is attached to the groundwater, as the groundwater level goes down, the lake level is going down as well. Okay. Something else here, this water that was going to the stream has been intercepted, and it's going for something else. Okay, so there is a net depletion of water from the stream. I shouldn't say this always happens, but pretty much it always happens here. And there's a couple of complications here, but we don't need to go into them right now. This is the basic thing that's going on. So a good hydrologist, when we're talking about what's the impacts of a new high-capacity well going to be, you have to think about where are we lowering water levels and where are we intercepting water from where it was originally going to go. Okay? All right, good. to put too fine a point on it, there's two basic controls on groundwater and groundwater levels and stream flows. One of the basic controls, one of the big wheels over here, is how much precipitation we get. Okay, wet years, we get more water going in the aquifer, water levels are going up, stream flows are going up. Dry years, the opposite. The other big wheel here is groundwater pumping. And this takes down what the natural highs and lows were going to be, and it makes them lower. Okay. One more thing here we could talk about, and this says, how does groundwater get polluted? And the way this happens is we have a pollution source at the surface of the earth. Rain's going through it, it's picking up stuff that you don't want to be in there, and then it's making what we call a plume that's going from where it comes in to where it's leaving over here. And so if you're unfortunate enough to have your well and one that's intersecting a plume here, well, you're going to be getting that pollution, whatever it is. And if you're also have a landscape where you have a large pollution source over here, that pollutant may take up the entire aquifer thickness here. So my neck of the woods here in the Wisconsin Central Sands, you know, the rule of thumb going back decades was you got a problem with your water. Well, go deeper, you know, get out of the pollution, go deeper. We're running out of deeper. In fact, we have run out of deeper. And then sometimes when people are going deeper, they're getting in this nasty water. High iron, high manganese, sulfur in their water. There's natural occurring radioactive stuff that's in a lot of our deep water too that you want to avoid here. So it's like, you know, if you got too much pollution, there may not be an escape for you. You know, you may be stuck with treatment or bringing in water from another source. So this says we live in a hydrologic interesting area here. What do I mean by we? I mean this area that I like to call the northern Great Lakes states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And of course, you can see what makes us hydrologically interesting here right off the bat is all the surface waters we have. You know, 10,000 lakes, we got 10,002 wetlands, streams, all that kind of stuff here. And the reason for it is this. It's because of our geology. We have these big tracts where we have coarse soils, you know, thick sands over here that are able to accept water and store it in here. So this is a map. It's a map of how much of stream flow is groundwater as compared to how much is direct runoff here. So the blue color means like there's 90% or so of the water that in streams is coming from a groundwater source. It's not direct runoff. Most of the country looks like this. You know, where you have the amount of groundwater that's in streams is really small, and these streams tend to be flashy. You know, they dry up when you don't have rain, and then you know flood when you do. You know, so much of our area here has very steady kinds of flow because of our unique geology. So we are special. We have to think about, in my opinion, managing our water resources in the way because we are special. And you know, this is also why we got so many lakes. And if you look at where we have trout streams in the region here, it's in these blues. You know, the bluer they are, the more the better the trout streams are in general. Also, you know, this is where we have lakes, and so this drives our surface waters. It drives our the critters that lives in our lakes and streams as well. And you don't go trout fishing in central Illinois, do you? Okay. So those same things that make for good groundwater conditions, you know, the coarse sandy soils, the coarse sandy aquifer that lets water, you know, into it, also means that you have soils that don't hold on to water very well for agriculture. And also there's a lot of water down there that can be pumped by high capacity wells to do irrigation. And so, you know, when I was in high school, maybe grade school, we used to talk about a line somewhere over here. This was all the irrigated part of the country. This, you know, the east, we were the non-irrigated. Anybody else learn this? A few people? Okay, maybe it's just my school. But this is a recent development here. There's 20,000 some irrigation wells that have been developed in the northern Great Lakes states pretty much without a thought, most of them, of when are we taking too much? When are we going to have too much stream depletion? When are we going to have too much impact on our lakes? And it's only recently, this has been going on, well, I'll show you shortly, since about 1950. It's only recently that we're playing catch up. Say, how do we manage this thing? Do we let it go, have laissez-faire, or do we take some kind of proactive stance on this? In our little region right here in central Wisconsin, we like to think of this is where the whole thing got started here. Even if it's not true, I'm going to claim it. So let's talk about the Wisconsin Central Sand. So my town of Stevens Point is right about here. This is Jen Kingsley's Portage County over here where she works. Adams County, Waushara County. The area here is about 60, 70 miles long, about 50 miles wide here. It's got 600 miles of headwater streams in it, a lot of them trout water. It's got 100 lakes that are at least 25 acres and more on it, and then many, many, many more that people like it and people value. So, this is kind of on the ground kind of look. This is the Evans Creek, a highly prized trout stream by us. And I think this is a July day. The reporter and I are freezing our feet in there. It was great. This is our Sunset Lake here, a county park that people love to come to recreate on. And something about us here that this is, in my opinion, is our calling card for the future of our economy. People aren't going to come to us because we're Twin Cities or Madison or something like that. They're coming for this stuff, quality of life, nice environment. And so as much as this is, you like to do things for critters and fish and all that, to think about it in cold terms, this is also important to us in dollars and cents. We pump a lot of water in here. This is 2013 statistics. This was the last average year we got. We have been an incredible wet, historic wet, the last half dozen years. But we pump about 74 billion gallons in an average year, more in a drought year, less in a wet year. And people say, why are you picking on the farmers? Truth to be told, my best friend is an irrigated farmer, and in-laws are farmers, and grandfather was a farmer. This is where all the water's getting used. This is where our challenges are. This, I think, is probably dairy consumption way down here. If we got rid of all the dairy, which I'm not suggesting we do, it doesn't make a pinch of difference here. We got to go after this one here. What do we grow in Central Sand? So people think that we're taters, but actually corn is the largest crop, and it uses similar amounts of water to potatoes. So corn is the biggie, potatoes is the next, and we have other vegetable crops here. This would probably be snap beans and sweet corn and other odds and ends fill in the blank. So that kind of gives you an idea of the agricultural lay of the land. So let's do a little history here, how we got to where we are here. So in the 1930s, we have the start of irrigation. And the way I picture this, if my farmer buddy tells me, yeah, you got it about right. People had an old engine, from a Model T or something like that, and they get a pump, attach the two of them, put a big sucky hose in the local creek, and they could irrigate the area not too far away from that creek. I'm guessing it was 20 acres, 40 acres, something like that. This went on for a while, and we get into the 1940s, 1950s, and we're drying up creeks catastrophically. When you do a surface water diversion there, that the Attorney General says, no, you can't do that. We have this public trust here, and a private party just can't take the water and use it to the detriment of other citizens of Wisconsin. And so the Attorney General is kicking out irrigators and giving some a permit, but it's a limited number. In the meantime, we have new well drilling technology coming in from Nebraska. So you could put in big diameter wells and turbine pumps, and you can pump a whopper amount of water. Not only that, but we learned how to fabricate aluminum in big quantities during World War II for aircraft. It's like, wow, why don't we use this for making irrigation machines that can cover the landscape there too? So we had this convergence of technology, and we see more groundwater irrigation going on. And then 57 to 59, we have a great debate. How much, and the average legislator, and probably average citizen, knew about that much about groundwater then. But there's great debate going on. It's very interesting for those who are fans of democracy, and who isn't. If you look at the papers of the day and how the newspapers covered this stuff, it was so wonderful. They would give detailed arguments and positions of different politicians and things. It's really amazing time, I think, for newspapers, and I really wish we were back there, I think. So we have this great debate going on. So these are the sideboards of the debate. Here's the conservationist view here. They're not saying, no, let's not do that, but they're saying, let's be careful. Let's be careful here how we do it. Pretty good idea when you don't understand what's going on. And then you have the people that want to irrigate here saying, hey, no reasonable person is worried about this. This is unlimited water down there. And besides, we don't have enough information. That's always a good way to kick the can down the road. Well, we need more information. And we still hear that 50 years later. And so this is terrible because there's important information up there. Oh, well. So this is 1950, and we got 2 high-capacity wells in the 1950s in the Central Sands. And now we're at 1960, and we have 97. It's grown to 97 at that time. And in 1965, it's not like this went completely unnoticed. Right over here in the Little Plover River, a fellow named Ed Weeks of the United States Geological Survey did a study. What's this irrigation business going to do to our lakes and streams here? It was wonderful work. They did also completely politically incorrect. They did a film back in the day that all hydrologists of my era had to watch, where they intentionally put in a high capacity well near a stream, and they pumped that well until the stream dried. Really, it was a nice visual, good piece of work. And my daughter, who's in a hydrogeology class at UW-Madison now, just saw that thing. I was so happy. But old Ed Weeks, studied this groundwater surface water interaction here. And he did a publication here in 1965. It says 1965 up there, where he said, he's working with slide rules and graph papers and pencils, right? That was the computers of the day. But they came up with a groundwater management tool that we could have used then, okay? Already in 1965, but we're still kicking that can down the road in Wisconsin. But he said, each irrigated acre is going to take this much water on average out of the stream flow. And, you have to be careful. There could come a day that here or in similar streams, we are going to be taking too much. So we get to, I think this is 1970, and we're up to 500 wells. And old Ed is doing another study down here east of a town called Plainfield. Who knows Plainfield? Oh, I'll ask you later why you know it. It does have a checkered past. But Ed is studying some lakes over here, and he comes out with this report, and he does this calculation again using the tools of the day, and he says, if 50% of the acreage in this area goes into irrigation, we could expect lake levels to be 3, 4, 5 feet lower. And maybe somebody ought to think about how we manage that. What threshold should we start thinking about limiting irrigation withdrawals? These were the lakes here, and too far back for you to see, but this one, the bathymetry is saying it's about 12 feet deep. This long lake over here, about 14 feet deep. Some of these are shallow. They're lakeish to wetlandish. There's this one over here that's, I think, 35 feet deep. We're going to come back to this in a little bit. So then we go to 1980, where there's more wells. I can't tell you how many now. I think we're over 1,000. 1990, maybe we're at 1,500. 2000, we're at the year 2000. I think we're at 1,800. And then we have something that happens between 2004 and 2015 that needs a name. And so I've named it. I call it the Big Dry. And this is where we can do forensic hydrology and we can see pumping impacts going back to 1965, 1970. When we look at stream flow records and that sort of thing. But in 2004, this becomes undeniable that we got an issue. Okay? We're not in a terribly dry period, and we got bad things happening. So these are the lakes that our buddy Ed Weeks studied here. Gone, greatly diminished over here. This Huron Lake is 35 feet deep, so that just got a whopper more shoreline. It was still there, and it got shallower. This is a fellow named Brian Fish looking out on Long Lake here. He bought his place, I think, in 2003, and the guy had sold it to him says, yeah, it's a little dry, but it always comes back up. So that's probably 2003. This is 2006. What do you think happened to the trophy bass fishery here, right? Wait. This is 2007. Okay, it was a meadow here, and even in the driest times, which in our neck of the wood was the late 1950s, 1958 to 1964 was a miserable dry time. People that lived around here, who are old people, I mean, like older than me, they said, gosh, we used to always go down and catch frogs and turtles. This lake never dried up. It's just to the side here. Now we're in this record territory for how much precipitation we got. This thing is full again, and this is just ruining my life because it's people. We told you. And but that lake never would have gone dry without pumping. Never. Little Plover River, which again chugged along really happily during those really dry years. It dried up in stretches every year from 2005 to 2009. We have something called the public right stage, where there's the public right is being infringed, and it really is a low flow, and that it was below the public right stage most of the time of the Big Dry. A neat lake that has a camp for indigent kids here, still water. This is taken, so this is at the boat landing. There's 50 feet of shoreline before you get to the water from the boat landing here. Of course, the fish pretty well died out here. County Park, where 100 people on a hot Sunday afternoon would be swimming and all that sort of thing, virtually abandoned during this time. It got usable again about a year ago, finally, I think. Fish were toast. How about this one? A lake where the dock goes to nowhere. Okay, so the industry here was like, no, this is record drought. This is record drought. Well, look at this. That's a little piker kind of a drought, or barely. The red line is the average here. Compared to historic low precipitation periods here. This is nothing that are out of the ordinary here when all this bad stuff happened. By the way, you can see where we are in the current era. This is 2019. We're not even done with the doggone year yet, and we're over like 8-10 inches of precip right now. We haven't had an average year since way back here. What this is all about, who knows? But usually you don't stay above average forever. We'll see. So now we're at 2010. We're at about 2,100 high-capacity wells, none of which got a review to see what their impact would be. And now we're at 2016. We're at about 2,400, 2,500 high-capacity wells in the area. Okay. So that's our situation. I used to talk about how we did the science and tell you the the next stuff here, but usually people just glaze over. And so this is my way of saying we've done a lot of work. Not just me, like this is one of ours, that's another one of ours, but the people at the United States Geological Survey and the Wisconsin Geological Natural History Survey, and we're really tight on our findings here. We don't have an inch of difference among us. But we have this big area here, what we call now what wells do when they bring water level down, we call it drawdown. Okay. This is our drawdown area here, this long shape here. The biggest drawdown area here is on the county line between these two. And this is sort of an average during this period, and it's an underestimate. In my business, you never want to overestimate this stuff. It really comes back to kick you in a bad way. But you get an idea of where water levels have dropped substantially. The impact on streams is always hard to show, but anyway, this is a snippet from one part of the Central Sands here. You know, the red areas mean that we're missing 25 to 50% of the flow. Again, on average, not summers. And the black mean, you know, things are dried up. So our streams have really taken a big hit too. So let's switch gears just a little bit here, but let's talk about groundwater pollution here and what it looks like in the Central Sands. Here's the nub here. We got two big things that we're worried about: nitrate and then pesticide residues here. Nitrate over the Central Sands as a whole, 20% of the wells exceed the drinking water standard of 10, but it's much higher in agricultural areas, and it's much lower where we don't have a lot of intensive agriculture. In terms of pesticide residues, we're finding the residues of 13 pesticides. Most of the time they're not over standards, but for a lot of these things we don't have standards yet. So, you know, I guess in a democracy you say, oh, you know, maybe I don't want to drink that stuff, but okay, it's where we are according to the law. These things with bigger print are ones that we're finding more frequently and at higher concentrations. The ones in smaller print, you know, we're finding less frequently and lower concentrations. One thing, there's a class of pesticides called neonicotinoids here. They're frequently used as seed coatings, and also they're sprayed on for certain pests on potatoes by us. I don't know by you. And you know, this isn't my science. There's an entomologist who's working for the industry at the University of Wisconsin, and he's saying, you know, the concentrations that we're seeing in the groundwater, we ought to be worried about when that groundwater goes into a stream, you know, about what the effects on the aquatic life are. He also says, you know, when we're taking that irrigation water and putting it up into the atmosphere, maybe we ought to be worried about pollinators, bees, yeah, and other pollinators there too. Still an area of active research. I'm not saying that this is definite, but this is a fellow named Russ Groves, who is very widely respected. If we look at some of our townships here and that are more agriculture, and what fraction of the water samples coming from these townships exceed the nitrate standard here, you see, you know, 37%, 6%, so you know, 1 out of 3 wells, 45%, 44%, whopper amount of high nitrate in Central Sands groundwater. This is my county. This is work that Jen Kingsley did. We did this jointly with her. This will take just a second to explain. So that last slide was about what fraction of wells exceed the nitrate standard. This one is what's the average nitrate concentration. Remember, the standard is 10. What's the average nitrate concentration in these 2 mile by 2 mile squares here? These darkest colors mean at least 20 parts per million, or double the drinking water standard is what the average water quality is. Some of them, there's one here that's 42 parts per million. Whopper big numbers that we're seeing in groundwater here. And you know, our division of health is pretty straightforward. They don't want anybody drinking water that's over the standard. There used to be just just infants, and then it was infants and pregnant women, and it was infants, pregnant women, and women who may be pregnant. And others say, "Nah, guys, you don't drink this either." Okay. So yeah, I mean, so this is quite an alteration of our water resources here. It's kind of funny when the top is missing, but the nitrogen leaching from our agricultural system is, I got large up here, that's scientific, I know. It's huge, it's huge. So field corn, we're losing 80 pounds an acre. All these are about half the amount of fertilizer put on. It's leaching through the soil and getting to groundwater. Potatoes the highest, 100 to 200 pounds per acre. If you want groundwater that meets the nitrate standard, you have to be leaching less than 20 pounds per acre. So we're way over that with these kind of numbers here. And it suggests that we need to think about, in our neck of the woods, other ways to deal with this problem. So this says, what keeps us from doing better? What keeps us from doing better here? And I think I mostly mean this from a democratic point of view. What's hindering us from going forward with a policy? And the policy could be, we're going to let it go because this industry is too important to us. We're just going to let groundwater go to heck, and it's every person for themselves in finding clean water, or we do something about it. So what is keeping us from doing better? First, denial. Industry is way in denial here. And these dry-ups are natural. We see them all the time. Even where you have good information showing it never dried up, we saw it. Nitrate is coming from, well, it's something else. It's from things that people did 20 years ago sometimes. Sometimes it's from septic systems. And these things are untrue. But the denial is keeping us from making any progress on this issue. Secondly, we have techno fixes that don't work. We say we got these things, we got this widget or that gadget, but they don't work. So on the irrigation front, say our industry, hey, we got new nozzles, yay, but you're still putting the same amount of water on. It doesn't make a difference. We got irrigation scheduling, which is true, and it's a good way to. You say, well, how much evaporated on a given day? Now we got to replace it, but that's been around for decades already, and this isn't saving us. We can't think about how we're going to save a couple of drops. We need to think about how we're going to save swimming pools full of water. Then we got sensors, but you're still putting the water on in large quantities here. So there's nothing shown that these kind of things are going to get us out of the situation here. They might help us do a little fine tuning here and there, but they're not going to keep the Little Plover River from going dry or Long Lake. When it comes to techno fixes and now mostly the nitrate problem here, it's like, well, we fertilize to the university recommendations. University recommendations are not based on safe drinking water quality. They're based on maximizing profit. Okay, so you quit. When you're not going to get any more return off of the next dollar you're going to spend on nitrogen fertilizer, you quit fertilizing. It makes sense here. But, that doesn't get us anywhere to where we would need to be to reduce leaching of nitrate enough to make a difference. Cover crops, cover crops are a good thing. We should always be doing cover crops. They don't significantly cycle enough nitrogen to make a difference here. Some great work by the late Larry Bundy at the University of Wisconsin. Very clever work. And he said, we're not seeing any return in the system. Spoon feeding is that we don't all gob on all the fertilizer at the beginning of the year, but we put it on through the irrigation system, or we banned it mid-season or something like that. This isn't going to get us anywhere either. This one, we need more study. And the famous one will give us 2 years. And And next thing you know, 10 years have gone by. Okay? So this is can kicking. One of the things that we see by us is the ag economics are overstated. Not that they're not important. Please don't get me wrong. And we want our neighbors to do well. But lake and stream economics are neglected. So I'll give you an example. A local grower put a piece in the paper saying that his industry was responsible for 35,000 jobs in this area. It's like, wow, that's a lot of jobs. And then you go through the number, you go, wait a second. There's not the 2 or 3 counties that he was talking about. There's not that many jobs total in that county. There's some fishy numbers going around here. We frequently hear this is an $8 billion industry in the Central Sands. Nobody knows where that number came from. I asked my ag econ colleagues at UW-Madison. They don't know. They come up with much different numbers. By the same token, we're ignoring the lake and stream economics. So the number of jobs in our agricultural sector is going down, and agriculture nationally. We got more technology, bigger tractors, all that kind of stuff. It's a long decline, and they're thinking, what's going to work? Well, tourism economy, people who buy cottages on lakes and that sort of thing. This is probably where you're going to be growing jobs, if anywhere. And then some of the lake and stream people are saying, the 3% of us that live on lakes and streams in a given county, we're paying 30% of the taxes here. You say, how about a little respect? It seems reasonable. And finally here, political power differential, huge. The industry lobby has lobbyists. It's got campaign contributions that it can make. It's a very well-oiled machine. Lake and stream interests, not much. We're talking doing bake sales, to raise a few nickels sometimes is what those folks are doing. So I'm going to get into a specific here, and then I'll close out shortly. So the journalist Lee Berquist with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, great guy. I hope he never retires. He put this series together about 3 years ago, War of Water in the Land of Plenty, and I scratched my head on it. Really, Lee? You're going to call this a war? And I got to thinking about it. Yeah, it certainly isn't a shooting war, right? But it is a war of words. It is a war of politics. And I'll just kind of give you some examples of this. Oh, wait, first of all, I'm going to talk about who are the belligerents here. Okay. So on the one side, you have the agricultural industry, and this is the Wisconsin Potato Vegetable Growers Association, the Dairy Business Association, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. They have very strong allies a whole bunch of years in our state with the legislature, the attorney general, and our former governor, former attorney general, former governor. And they constitute a bloc. And what are they looking for? They're looking for unfettered, unregulated access to groundwater. Wherever they want to put in a well, they get a well, no matter what the effect is on surface waters, and they get to pump all they want. On the other side, you have lake and stream interests, people that homes on lakes or streams, people who just like to fish or kayak and that sort of thing. And, the local folks by us, they have some allies with Madison organizations, Sierra Club, this and that. They also have a friend in the courts because the public trust doctrine is written into our Constitution. And the way it's been interpreted is that this belongs to all of us, and so one user can't degrade it to the exclusion of other users. And they've been winning in the courts. So this whole thing started, and it says right there, in 2013 with the Lake Beulah decision. So we went from anyone can pump all the groundwater they want when they went to court, to the Supreme Court saying the DNR, our DNR, must consider the environmental impact of a proposed high-capacity well when presented with sufficient concrete scientific evidence. Wow, okay. So it doesn't say what we're going to do with the old wells, all the ones that are in there. We're talking about when new wells coming in the door, we're going to be taking a look at these. So we have, as one speaker by us called, we have 420 days of science where a young staff at our Department of Natural Resources, flying by the seat of their pants, is making this up. How are they going to do it? These are wonderful, hardworking public service, and they're doing this for 400 and some days until they get smushed. And the first smush was out of the blue. A legislator snuck something in the budget. When there's something you don't want the public to see, you sneak it in a budget bill. Okay, and it says that you can, if you think the DNR screwed up here and it's a high capacity well issue, citizen, you can't sue them. Like, Darrin, what can't people sue you about, right? I mean, people can sue the DNR about everything. But they picked out high capacity wells as the one thing. Okay, so there was one blow. And then, the industry came with a campaign here. So this is Andy Wallendahl. He's a potato grower. Gordon Spears is with the Dairy Producer Association. And they're saying those lake and stream advocates, they're untruthful, they're irresponsible, and they're environmental activists. We're active environmentalists. They have no evidence pumping is causing problems. Well, yeah, we do. You saw all this stuff here. We have studies showing nothing is changing here. And we need legislation that provide DNR staff with scientifically sound guidelines, which was code from take the authority away from them to do anything. Okay? And that's what was migrating through our legislature here. Oh, here's another example here. This fellow on a television commercial from a potato grower. Studies show vegetables use far less water than trees. Wow, who knew this? And I'm thinking, God, they have some kind of studies that show pines and maples and oaks are using more water than potatoes? Wow, how about that? I got to see this. So I said, hey, show us the list of your studies. And it's like, wow, okay, this isn't what I imagined. They got studies on some Chinese apple trees, irrigated citrus trees in Spain that they're comparing with irrigated melons and lettuce and artichokes, baobab trees, eucalyptus, blue gum plantations. I found this very ballsy. I can't think of another word for it. Okay? And then they came up with a book here. They call it a fat book. It was 100 and some pages here. They gave it to everybody, every person in the legislature, and they were taking it around to county boards as well here. This was an intercepted email that made it in the paper and basically said, hey, we're trying to head off local activist pressures with this thing. And this book had truly astounding claims in it here. Here's one, that irrigation water, okay, this is my word, comes from a magic deep aquifer, and it all seeps back to the shallow aquifer, and nobody's seen this other aquifer, by the way. So they say irrigation actually is increasing stream flows. That little Plover River, it never went dry. There's more water than ever in there. The trees, that's what's drying the lakes and streams here. Even though there's still the same amount of trees in the region, where we're seeing these terrible things as there were 50 years ago. And these researchers, and this time at least they're not talking about me, they're talking about some colleagues at the USGS here. They don't know what they're talking about. They're beyond their expertise here. Then our Attorney General does something, Schimmel, and he kicks this thing. He came up with what's generally thought to be poor legal reasoning here. Is that DNR, you can't implement this thing that the Supreme Court told you had to implement here. This is a Supreme Court decision that went 7-0. Okay, and this is in a Supreme Court where one justice in our dysfunctional Supreme Court was choking another justice here. They totally agreed on this. Okay, and this thing is still sitting in the courts, winding our way through here. And a lower court said, DNR, you got to implement this thing, but again, it's still winding through. The cherry on the Sunday here was 2017 Act 10 here. What this did, this is what I think the industry was going for all along, is that pumpers get permanent, high-capacity well approvals. Okay? They don't get rescinded or anything, or can't get altered. Next thing is on high capacity well owners. They can buy and sell high cap well approvals with land transfer. And thus, there's a thought here. A lot of people are worried, did we just privatize our groundwater? We gave it to somebody and we're letting them buy and sell that water? This sounds like ownership. So well approvals are virtually automatic. We're going to do another study here. Actually, there's some good parts of the study, but it would take too long to explain. And through a very convoluted way, they killed the funding on this thing. We went for 2 years. We're in the middle of the study. They're not redoing the funding on the thing. And so this is where we sit. Will things get better? The governor, our current governor, has a veto pen. Our current attorney general doesn't like this case, but it's been joined by other interests here in the Supreme Court. So we're not going to back out of that. We're locked into that. The legislature is still on the side of let everybody take as much water as they want and hang the lakes and streams. So I think what it does is, really comes down to what are we going to do in the democratic process here? How can we get more attention on this issue as high capacity wells spread? Can we be taking? Will other areas and other representatives start getting upset about this? I want to make one thing clear as I close here. I'm not against high capacity well pumping. Actually, in my professional life, when I'm going around, I say, I'm giving information, and people will decide what they want from it. I'm a little more animated tonight than I usually am. But I truly feel that we can do substantial amount of pumping here, and get better crop production here without doing too much harm on lakes and streams. But it can't be infinite, right? You can't let everybody take all the water they want. And so most people on lakes and streams, I think if you're talking, you're going to take 3 or 4 or 5 inches of water level here, okay, they're going to shrug their shoulders. We just start talking about 3 or 4 or 5 feet, now they're upset, right? So this is what we need to do. We need to get to a standard and allocate water in our state. And you folks are in a different situation. Darrin and I have had a great day and a half here talking about how things are different, and we'll let him enlighten you. You're going to introduce him?
No.
You're not.
You just did.
Yeah, you did.
Wow, huh? You guys glad you brought George into town? He was animated, he was insightful, good experience, any number of things. I hope that's what you folks were looking for. My presentation is going to be maybe a little less animated, but I do, I'm not even sure what to think. This is the first time I've seen this presentation, and it's kind of tough to see, right? Lakes that are dry, streams that are dry, resources that are heavily impacted are what we're known for, right? You come to Park Rapids, it is our lakes, our streams. We still have a vibrant agriculture community that's so vital to this community, as well as the tourism, the community, any number of things that's going on here. But that is way too light there, isn't it? Can you guys see that? Maybe it's just where I'm sitting at.
No, it's dark. Hopefully it'll...
Huh, yeah, that's not coming in at all.
I think maybe the projector is starting to...
Maybe the bulb is going on this
yeah.
thing? This might make this a little more difficult. A lot more difficult. So we're going to wing it, right? So, many of the challenges that George spoke about we have similar challenges in Minnesota. We have opportunities, but I do think it is a different story to tell here. We have a community that's involved. We have agriculture interests that are involved differently. And we have an authority within the DNR as well as our sister agencies that's quite a bit different than what we see in other states. We have clear statutory requirements in our statutory and rule requirements for our agencies, be it the Department Ag, Health, Pollution Control, or the DNR that provide us that set of guidelines, that set of standards that need to be met. One of the things for the DNR that's most important is I usually start with our mission. Our mission most often is understood as protecting the resource, right? That's what everybody, you need to protect the resource. Well, that's one part of our mission. Second part of our mission is provide outdoor opportunities, recreational opportunities in particular, and that plays in this here, right? Because there are lakes and our streams and our forests and our wetlands and all that. They provide us a lot of those opportunities. But thirdly, to provide our commercial uses to resources. That's one that's not understood all the time, right? We have mining interests, we have gravel interests, we have a forestry department that manages our forests, and we have folks like me that manage and work with addressing water out there, useful for commercial purposes. We want to make sure that that use of water is sustainable. I don't know if you guys can read that at all. Does not harm ecosystems, water quality, or the ability of future generations to meet their needs. That's our overarching goal in our groundwater management in the state of Minnesota, right? It's a pretty good goal. If you ask me, right? We don't want to overuse the resource. It comes down to that. Yeah, this is going to be difficult to do with you guys being able to unsee this. So
Can I make a suggestion, Darrin?
shoot.
Why don't we take a break and why don't you see if you can fix this?
Yeah. Anybody see Jeremy still around? Wrongstead?
I want to turn the projector off and let the bulb cool.
Yeah, I guess let's try to do something like that. We'll take a quick break here, you guys. Is that
Thank
right,
you.
Carolyn?
Turn off the projector and let the bulb cool.
Get a different projector?
Well,
That
try
might
to let the
work,
bulb cool down because it happens when the bulb is on. Taught geology for 40 years.
when we first fired it up,
And might be losing the bulb.
Question for you. Is there any correlation between the amount of nitrates that you see and pesticide content?
yes,
So if you got high nitrates in your water, you probably got pesticides.
yes.
That's what I would assume.
Yeah. It's not a perfect correlation. If you don't have any nitrate, you don't have any.
Hard to see. Most of the slides are photos.
We don't see it. They're getting down just fine as it is. Another question? Sir?
One of the things that I assumed would be in your presentation is you had no data with regard to the correlation between the damage to the various water resources and tourism dollars.
Okay, the gentleman was saying there was no data in my presentation showing what the decline was in tourism dollars from the from the dry ups, and yeah, those have not been developed. With the hardest hit lakes, a lot of times they're privately owned by one or two parties, and they stayed there anyway. They didn't move away or sell it. In the case of that one Long Lake that dried up completely, a lot of those folks were year-round residents, and so they lost a lot of property value. The townships lost a lot of property tax value because their land was reclassified as non-lakefront. But this is pretty poorly understood right now. And what the future will be on more water bodies and what the economic impact is, that would really be a good statistic for us to do. I'm trying to get some of my econ buddies interested in that topic. Another question?
Has anybody done the study? Mark Shepard's from Wisconsin, does a polyculture perennial system for growing food. Do we really need to stay with corn and soybeans? I mean, when it comes down to it, all we're looking for is calories. To do a study on a polyculture, the use of water compared to annual crops, and what your calorie output could be from a perennial system compared to an annual system?
So the gentleman's making a good point, and I won't talk about perennial versus annual crops necessarily, but it seems to be if our end goal, there's two things going on with agriculture, right? One is to to feed people and produce product. The other is to keep businesses running. Agriculture isn't a business. I suspect if we were going to think about in this country, if we were going to start thinking about how to do agriculture from scratch, it would look quite a bit different than today. Would we be making ethanol out of corn? 40% goes there, but 20% of the corn goes for high fructose corn syrup. I think we'd be scratching our heads and finding other ways to do things. But that's my just opinion as a guy and not as an academic or something. I don't know a lot about that.
When you refer to making ethanol
Yes.
out of corn and stuff, what is the balance out of that when you're talking about fossil fuels? How much fossil fuels does it take to raise stuff to make ethanol?
Everybody hear the question just fine? Yeah. And so, the best estimates that I've seen on ethanol production is that as a fuel value here, maybe it's about break even. So with the energy that you put in, and you think about it, it's not just tractors running around and the energy costs of fertilizers and seed and all these other kinds of things, but the cost of distillation, energy cost of distillation. We're at a break-even kind of proposition. The way I remember ethanol being sold back to us, I don't know, was that 2005, 2006, is that corn was going to be a transition. We're going to make biofuel out of corn, but we realized that this probably isn't a real good idea, but we're going to transition to something else. We're going to have cellulosic or something like that. And we never cracked that nut. And we're still doing corn ethanol. Okay, we will
Another
let.
guy here with a question.
Where?
Right there.
Oh,
Any interference, so the earlier wells, are they the same depth as the more recent wells? And has there been any interference between those high capacity?
good question. So in the well world, we got something called well interference, where one well is drawing the water level down, and there's another one that's close enough, and the drawdown of the one is affecting another. And we haven't seen that. They usually go 80, 100 feet below the water table. These things tend to be spaced out at least a half a mile. And if there is interference, it's a foot or two. It doesn't seem to be causing major issues. And with that, we'll give it to the good-looking and much younger.
Thanks, Darrin. Selected here. All right, well, with that, I'm going to try and move forward in this a lot faster here for you folks. Generally, what I like to start out getting these presentations talking about our responsibilities, right? In groundwater world, groundwater quantity in particular, it's the DNR's responsibility. It is our responsibility to make sure that there's wise conservation, sustainable use of that resources. The buck does stop with us. That's pretty clear. Through statute, through rule, through plans that we have out there. In this case, this is a number of core strategies. You folks can probably read through it as we're sitting here. But really what it is, it's getting more information out there, getting more engaged, making sure that permits are out there, that the permit holders are adhering to those conditions, that we are improving and promoting the water conservation practices and addressing, and this whole thing, one of the most difficult ones is effectively addressing challenges in areas of high use. That's what we'll talk about today a lot, the reality in Wisconsin seems to be pretty dire, right, in those cases. We don't want to see that happen in Minnesota. We've got a White Bear Lake example, right? The litigation is ongoing down there as well, and the understanding, but similarly, right, they've got the highest precipitation period on record for the Twin Cities right now, and we still got 2 months to go. So we've been getting an enormous amount of water. Even here more recently in Park Rapids, folks have been saying it's really wet. I've actually been saying it hasn't really been that wet. It's been wet September and October here, but the water availability across the state varies. We're fortunate here again that in the central part of the area of the state here, where we see a lot of irrigation, we have some abundant water resources. This is where you see the focus of a lot of our high capacity wells. And this is what I was trying to remember when George was telling me earlier today. You know, you're talking 26, 27 average for this area. So it's quite a bit, you know, it's not a lot of precipitation there still. So we're fortunate we still have we're as close to the prairie area, the dry area, right, of the prairie. We're fortunate we're right on this boundary area where we have a net gain of water, and it's again primarily because we're able to hold that water in the ground as well. This affects the availability of water. I mean, 30 inches versus 20 inches in the state. So it's a change even how we address water management in the state. There's many different challenges that are out there. Are these important? Are the trout streams important? Are calcareous fens, or wetlands, the things that, the critters that are derived out of these that need these to sustain? We would say yes. We have statutes in the state that particularly, trout streams and calcareous fens in particular have protections on them that we cannot negatively impact them. Calcareous fens are not in this area. It's a particular kind of wetland, but it really does, different than other states, we have some strong statute and rule. We just have to make sure we're adhering to it, right? The expansion is out there, and high capacity use in the metro area is primarily water supply, right? They want more water, and they're finding out that they were using too much water down there. In the rural areas out here in these sand plains, it's agriculture. We'll get to that. We'll skip this. Again, this comes down to some of the conversations the information that George was providing, but we're seeing this increased demand, again, across the whole state, but even here in the Park Rapids area. This, if you're not familiar with this is Ponsford up here. This is the Hubbard Plain down in this direction. The yellow area, or the green dots, are all the permits prior to 1991. The yellow is since 2010, and interestingly, many of these, even since then, have all been filled in. I've got another scrap. Groundwater use across northwest Minnesota, which is primarily our sandy areas again, obvious. I mean, right, we're going up. We're talking, 60 billion gallons of water here. Yeah, right. Anyway, a lot of water. We're using, it's pretty clear the trends are, we're using more water, we have more irrigated land. How is that affecting our streams? We know it's affecting our streams, our rivers, our wetlands. Is it at an equilibrium? George talked a lot about that today, that is allowable, where we're not having fish kills, or the lake levels going down so much, or the wetland maybe not there anymore. And our area in particular, we've been pretty fortunate to be in front of this. We'll talk about groundwater management and how we're doing that here locally, but the roles within the state of Minnesota are parsed between 4 different agencies. The DNR particularly addresses water availability and ecological resources. So this is the bugs, the critters, and how much water is there, and how much water we can take out for sustainable use. The Department of Ag, Kim and Ryan are in the back there. Available. I hope you guys have been able to talk to them. Their primary responsibility is dealing with agricultural pesticides and fertilizers. The pollution control is industrial contamination, and the Department of Health is drinking water supply. We deal with all 4 of those agencies here locally, right? The Department of Health works with the city of Park Rapids, with Dean over there, to make sure that their water is clean and clear for you guys to drink. They've had contaminated water. They had to drill new wells. The cost for that is substantial, right? We want to make sure that we continue to work in that landscape to, at minimum, make sure that problem isn't getting worse in there for those drinking waters, for water supplies, but also private drinking wells, right? There's folks in this room that may be that those 10% over 10 parts per million, and you just found out about it, right? There's a lot of concerns in getting information out to folks. So what does the DNR do about it? We're going to try to go through this pretty quickly, but we have information, right? How much studying do you need to do? We realistically are making decisions now to determine if a negative impact is happening. We have findings to determine, and if it's found that we have an impact that is no longer allowable or is not allowable, we're going to deny those permits. We use efforts like the Geologic Atlas. This was recently completed in the Park Rapids area, in Wadena, Becker, Cass, and Hubbard counties. It's got an enormous amount of information about the geology of this area. This helps us understand capacity, how much water is down there, boundary conditions, any number of things that's really valuable for the DNR to understand how to address water availability. There's another part of this that the DNR is responsible for understanding the water quality in there, associated with realistically how old is the water, what's the residence time in these aquifers, trying to get more information again to help us build our understanding. We are the envy of many, many states in the amount of monitoring that we have in our landscape. We have more DNR groundwater observation wells on this landscape than any state that I'm familiar with. We have stream gauging, lake and wetland water level monitoring across this area. I think we have, just in the Park Rapids area, I think we have monitoring 25 lakes for water level, right? So if that isn't enough, we're doing something wrong. We have the data, is what I'm saying. So we have to make sure that we're making assumptions. We have a groundwater technical unit in the DNR, again, that's full of exceptionally experienced hydrogeologists that can make these determinations, that can provide us not with what this one irrigation pivot is doing, or this one municipal well is doing, but what's happening cumulatively with maybe 30 different wells, and try to make a determination of what's that impact and how do we address it. And if we're overusing water, we're going to have to make decisions about how to address that overuse. And we haven't made those type of decisions at this point, but there's areas in state, Cold Spring area, for example, they're working on this, Little Rock Creek. We talk about the Straight River and the Pineland Sands area more of an urgency instead of emergency. We know that these impacts are happening here on the groundwater quantity. We know there's high nitrates in particular in a lot of our wells that are surpassing the drinking water standards. We also use efforts, this is probably the less important slide, but it's our ability to communicate with the permittees. Before it was paper, it was getting less valuable information. Here we now have a permitting and tracking system which they tell us how much water they're using per month. We'd like to get that even down to or fine to a week, so we can start to get a better analysis of how much water is being used, who's using it, what crop is on those fields. This type of information is really helping us better understand that water out there and how much is using, let alone how much we potentially would have to determine is overused in certain areas of the state. About 2013, it was the DNR used to have to put a well in the ground, right? And then they would get evaluations. The city would spend $50,000, maybe $90,000 in a high capacity well, plus or minus. Then it would come to the DNR. Well, they already started the investment. It was almost like, you do this, you're almost expected you're going to get a permit, right? You spend that time of energy. We now have what we call preliminary well construction assessment that's been really valuable for, in particular, the agriculture interests out there that want to know, am I going to have a problem with getting an irrigation well here? What are the issues? Is there wetlands? Is there a stream? Is there a trout stream? Is there nearby wells that have interferences? We're providing the information so that they're able to make a decision on moving forward with, you may have to do more information gathering. You may have to do an aquifer test. You may have to go and determine what all your neighbors' well pump depths are at. It provides us with a mechanism to have a conversation about maybe we have too much water use in this area and you may not want to go and put a new well in. And it has been exceptionally helpful to have that conversation with these high capacity wells. The DNR uses aquifer tests. This is kind of a scattering of a number of the permits that have aquifer tests around in northwest Minnesota. This is a stressing of that system, right? We run these tests for 2, 3, sometimes longer weeks, high capacity, at full bore, so we can stress that system to really understand what's going to happen. Is that well over there? Is that lake going dry? I think George was saying it was the presentation of running that well so the river went dry. We want to maximize in these areas, particularly where we have very little information, to understand those impacts. Aquifer tests are becoming, they're not common still, but they're becoming a very useful tool, particularly in areas where we're finding more and more people are expanding the irrigation, right? Those aquifers that have been tapped and maybe matured, we're finding people spending more, they're going out and finding these little aquifers out there that have far more problems than maybe what these larger systems have. We're using groundwater modeling across the state. This is, some of them are less advanced, other exceptional, very advanced. Here's 2 examples in the state. We're using it at the Little Rock Creek. Again, these are just geographic areas, but it gives us more information. We've been collecting data for so long. We have a lot of data out there. We want to be able to put that in a model, to have it understand how to spit it back out, maybe use it to understand how we're stressing those systems, and use again the data that we're collecting to verify what's going on out there. It's going to help us determine thresholds for negative impacts and a number of things. The City of Park Rapids, for example, has a water supply plan to address overuse of water there. in outstate Minnesota, these get a little less attention, it seems like, because we don't have this large network here around the metro that are tapping into the same resource. But in outstate Minnesota, they've been real valuable to helping local communities understand how they can reduce their water use. We want to give props to the city of Park Rapids. I believe, and Dean can say it, 100 million gallon reduction in the last 5 years. You know, they were using 300 million gallons of water. They're now using 200 million. It makes sense to fix infrastructure, put in water conservation policies. It's 100 million gallons that's not coming out of the ground, but it's also 100 million gallons that they don't have to treat, right? So there's a value return there as well. And we try to work with communities to make sure that we're addressing this. Well interferences. I get this question all the time. What happens when that high capacity well, that irrigation pivot, that city well, that dairy farm draws my well down? We have a very strong very strong rule, actually statute, 103G here, in which we have a priority system of what priority water user you are in ranking. Domestic water supplies and consumptive use is less than 10,000 gallons a day. The second one is most of our private wells out there. If an egg processor, a power plant, or anybody else of these higher users, for some reason, during our review, we determined that we didn't think it was going to happen, but it did, and your well went dry because of that agricultural use, that appropriator can no longer use that water until they've resolved this well interference. This is really strong. It's used in the state now where we're seeing maybe 2 pivots were in a location and we have 4 or 3, right? And the water use is getting bigger, so well interferences, they're going to become more common in areas where the density continues to increase and those impacts may be occurred. Particularly when we go through periods of drought, right? Statewide, it's been relatively wet here, but we're still getting more and more irrigation pivots. With the reduction in some of the commodity prices out there, we know that has limited the amount of permits that have been coming in and requests. Understanding recharge. You know, where's the best? How much land do we need to keep in some kind of a state that allows for recharge? We're trying to get a better understanding of that. In the Red River Valley, for example, they're even using groundwater wetland, restorable wetlands. Where were those wetlands drained? So we can actually do flood mitigation for the Red River, but also it's real beneficial to putting water back in the ground in these areas. So those were just a handful of tools that we use on a daily basis, understanding to review permits. We're fortunate in the state that we have the resources to continue to do this. Do we end up, I guess where I'm going here, do we end up maximizing their use all the time? Probably not, right? I mean, there's still limited resources and there's a lot of problem areas in the state. That's what it comes down to, right? There's certain areas that still get neglected because another area pops up, but we really try to make sure we're addressing those areas of high use. One of the tools that the legislature gave us back, I think 8 years ago, is a groundwater management area designation area. In that situation, that it allows us to cumulatively review all the water appropriations within that designated area. It's no longer just looking at one system and one system and one system. It's looking at all the systems together and how are they impacting the resource. Is it a sustainable use? And then moving forward with determining thresholds for negative impacts and managing that water collectively. Similar to what George had over there, you know, what do you think the blue is? Irrigation, right? I mean, that's really reflective of what's going on in the Park Rapids area. Vast majority of the water. Industrial processing, the potato plant down there, is using about the same amount of water for the last 30 years. But they're processing far more potatoes. They're doing a good job of recycling that water. You know, they're using the same amount of water. And so they found opportunities there. The city of Park Rapids already said reduce that 3% to 2% or less, right? It's the 100 million gallons they're no longer using. So the big player that we have out there is working with that irrigation community. So it is real important. And again, you can kind of see here in the groundwater management area. Some other things to see here is real important is, you know, it's concentrated in the middle, but we do have a fair amount of recharge area around the edges. We do have some opportunities there. The Straight River runs down the center here. We have up in Ponsford, we actually have about 450 feet of gravel to bedrock. So we have a lot of water stored there. Problem is, right, we sip water out from the top bottom. If you could maybe pull it from the bottom up, you know, it may be less of an issue, but up in the headwaters of the Straight River, those concerns are, the stream is about this big, right? The little Straight River Creek is this big. when you get down right before Straight Lake, you can get about a whole 6 inches arm, or 6 feet arm length. When you get down here further, it becomes quite a bit wider. You know, the impacts are going to be more felt on the headwaters than the lower reaches in a lot of cases because of just the available water that's going to be down there. I think I showed you this. It's the trends out there. Again, what the water use that's being reported. What's unique about the Straight River? Why is the DNR why did we do a groundwater management area designation and a plan here? We have concerns about overuse of water. It's as simple as that. We know the Straight River is the amount of discharge, that groundwater discharge to the river is being depleted. We know in the wintertime, we see it in our gauge stations, that the water actually gets higher in the wintertime. That is a reverse of what should normally happen in a system. Is that amount of water that's been depleted at equilibrium? Is it at a point in which that will be an allowable impact, what's not negatively impacting the trout or the stream or the community? We're working on determining that. We've got a 5-year plan, and we're 3 years into it. So we've got 2 years to figure this out yet. Our first groundwater management meeting, but our next groundwater management meeting will be sometime in January. We'll be working with the producers, similar folks in the room here, to kind of give you an update on where we're at on all that plan. But one of the important things there is you know, we have a lot of these natural resources, the Straight River, and we've got 28-inch brown trout, right, Doug? Is 28, is that the biggest? You know, big ones, right? 26, huge brown trout in here. We got, and agriculture. It's important, it's a resource. You know, so we have a lot of resources, our lakes, our wetlands, our people, our tourism, a number of things. But our water needs are changing. You know, we see it not just in the city or the community or the individuals. We've got more private wells out there, but again on the agricultural area. The Straight River Groundwater Management Area runs essentially from Long Lake up to Bad Medicine Lake. So it's a fairly large area, but it's something we thought was going to be a real manageable area. We've got realistically about 10 water agricultural producers in there. That's not many. You'll be able to work with only 10 who are willing to work through, went through the planning process, provided input throughout the way, and in some extent have bought into making sure that they are not the ones who are contributing to some long-term damages in the area. Again, there's a number of plan objectives that are real similar to those core. You know, do not degrade, no harm to ecosystems, reasonable, efficient water complies with water conservations, does not degrade water quality. That's a tough one for us. It's a really tough one for us. The Department of Agriculture is the primary responsible for nitrogen and fertilizers and pesticides. They have a nitrogen management plan. I think I'll talk about here in a little bit, but it's one of the ones that's real difficult for us because the DNR plays a role in that. We have statute that says that we have to consider groundwater quality as well in our permit decisions, and how that's going to play out in the future is yet to be determined exactly. We know that we have practices moving forward in that area. Observation wells. I think I said this earlier, the Straight River Groundwater Management Area has the highest density monitoring in the state. If we can't figure it out here, how are they going to figure it out in those other places? Right? My job as the project manager to make sure that this project continues to move forward. We evaluate the resource, we evaluate the permittees, we make sure that the conservation practices are being applied, and determine thresholds. I mean, that is what we have said we're going to do. We're going to determine a negative threshold. How much water can come out of the Straight River? What's the discharge going to be, the low discharge before we have to reduce water use? What's the wells? What's the levels in the water, the wells out there that it may go to? We've made an obligation to say we're going to do these things. Here's just one example of a well in the Straight River. You know what this here? You know, this is a pumping signature. You know, pump on, pump off, pump on, pump off, right? So we have a lot of these situations where we know we've got long-term trends of data. You know, we've got, this is from 86 to, 2018 here. More recently here, we've been putting data loggers in there. We want to make sure that this information, that it all works together again, and we compare it to our stream gauge. We've got 5 stream gauges. We have one old site here, but we have 5 stream gauges on the Straight River, monitoring how much water is going through there at all times. You know, how many CFS is moving through those systems. George and I stopped by, again, the Little Straight River Creek, it's this wide, and we have a gauge on it. This is the highest density, I guess, that I'm aware of in the state for gauging, because we want to make sure we can correlate water use, with wells, with stream discharges, and make sure that we are not harming these ecosystems, and it's a sustainable water use. It's a big task, and we know that. The plan, the end of the 5-year plan, is that we've developed those thresholds. So again, in this area's got an enormous amount of geology information in it. We've got studies. We know where the water's flowing. We know how deep it is. We continue to have more and more information, I guess. But we want to make sure we're still trying to stimulate innovation out here. I know George said there's, some of these things may not make a damn of a difference, but we are still employing them. We do know that. Why is water conservation used? Leak detection, crop selection. There's a number of reasons why you want to do them. One of the things George and I talked about was deficit irrigation. I don't even know if I wrote that. Is that spelled wrong, I think? Deficient? Yeah. Deficit irrigation. Stress the crops out a little bit, then put some water on it. Really talk about how do you reduce water use coming out of that nozzle? Not is it a better nozzle, but is it 4 inches of water or is it 10 inches of water? And what we're seeing on this landscape is some of the farmers are doing that right now. They're putting peas in, right? I mean, I can tell you 5 years ago there was no peas growing in Park Rapids. There's a lot of peas growing in Park Rapids now. And they're putting them on, and they're only putting really a few inches of water, if any, on some of these fields now during the springtime. And they're being able to reduce if it was corn, maybe, 8 inches of water that would have been on that area. So they're trying to manage to make sure that they're maximizing their water need for the crops that are most important to them economically for that operation. And then maybe in those other years, putting something else. We'd love to see more peas, alfalfa, those type of things that lead less water out there. Lead to soil health and hopefully help in addressing the nitrogen issues that we're seeing out there. And speaking of that, right, George has some really telling numbers. We got high numbers of nitrogen in a lot of locations in this area. The township testing that Kim and Ryan have back there is really great information. Addressing that in the nitrogen management plan in the Straight River Groundwater Management area, the Department of Ag, as well as the other agencies that said we're going to step up to the plate and really start going and making sure that we follow that plan and make progress in addressing nitrates. I can't tell you where that's going to go. The responsibilities are much more clear with the Department of Ag, but we're a partner with them. We want to make sure if we're bringing information about water use, water conservation, that we're also doing the same with nitrogen and pesticide management on those operators. The Pineland Sands. Who's heard of the Pineland Sands? So the Pineland Sands is a geographic area by some researcher who was very smart, but he drew that boundary. It is not just an aquifer, it's many aquifers, and this was a geographic area of study, is what it is. And so I want to make sure everybody knows that. It is a part of the groundwater management area, but it's also a formation that's on a large outwash. But this same outwash extends all the way through here. The Wadena outwash, the drumlin area is what's there. But it's an area where we saw, and I've sat in this room at least twice talking about pines, conversions to agriculture, right? We were losing thousands of acres of pineland. It was shocking, right? I mean, people were calling me going, they're cutting all my trees down. What do I do? It's my neighbor's trees. And you can understand why it would be shocking to folks. The economics was allowing it to happen. There was a large timber industry, or a timber commercial timber owner that was selling their land. They were spending $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 to buy, prep, and put irrigation equipment on there. We're seeing less of it now, but this area we have far less information on, particularly the area around Bedora, southern Wadena, and Cass over here. This is called the St. Croix Moraine. It's in the till area where the moraine moved over in the outwash. But this area has probably less water, particularly the edge of it. The aquifers, the bedrock is about 300 feet. There's a lot of clay, there's a lot of confining layers in there. We know that if you use the same amount of water in this area on the east end, it may have a greater impact than what's happening on the west end over there, where we have more, quite a bit more water, a more robust system. We've been asking the legislature, I think, for the last 5 years to fund a study, right? We need another study. We do know that we have more limited water, but we don't fully know the rest of that system. So this is an area we've asked to do more study on, and more recently here there has been an EAW at the Nolte operation in Wadena County, I think it's North Germany Township, in which they're being requested the DNR actually is being required to be the responsible government unit to evaluate that operation and the permits in that location for groundwater contamination and groundwater quality, right, associated with also the water quantity. That's just really getting going. It's been a couple months now, I believe, since it was a discretionary EAW. Essentially, it was petitioned to the DNR. No, excuse me, it was a petition EAW, was petitioned to the DNR, and the DNR granted the petition. So we're going to continue to work through that over the next, I think originally they're thinking 8 to 10 months. I'm not exactly sure what the total timeline is it, but we're trying to get more information in there because we know that there's still a lot of potential for this. You know, $8 bushel corn could come back, $15, $16 bushel soybeans, and the reality is we may see more of this. We want to make sure that we have the information so when it comes again, we're ready. We're ready to understand how much of this area can address how much additional capacity we have for irrigation in these areas, and for all it matters, habitat loss, water quality concerns in the groundwater, all of those sorts. So I guess that's kind of what's next. The Straight River Groundwater Management Area, we're going to continue to monitor, but we are in an active assessment again right now. I told you a little bit ago, actually, this is one example of a slide from a few years ago. It's a little bit messy, but what it's saying is this is the winter time. And we saw around a 2 cubic feet per second increase in water in the Straight River. This is in '97. We know at minimum we were losing 2 CFS of water discharge to the stream. That was at minimum at '97. So the likelihood is we're still losing some water in that system. We want to make sure we know how much it is. We've got all these gauges out there. We're now analyzing that gauge data as well as the well data, as the amount of water that's being pumped out there. And we're going to be bringing that back to you folks. We're going to ask specifically that all the permittees are part of this process so they understand where the DNR is at, but we want to engage you folks as well as the public. So you'll see more. I mean, realistically, I think I know 90% of you probably in this room already, but I hope we're able to continue to have this conversation about communication and what the DNR is doing. The Pineland Sands, we still want to fund this study to make sure we better understand really the area that we don't know about, the Pineland Sands. We know a ton about that Straight River area again, right? We've got the data, we've got information. We need to make decisions with that information. That's where we're at, is making those decisions. The rest of that, we need to know more information because I was surprised as anybody to see applications continue to come in. I look at an air photo and go, well, that's forest land, right? That's pretty. It was just foreign to anybody to see that much loss of forest land being converted, and that may come back again. So, with that, I guess if you got questions, George and I can both field them here as it goes along.
Listening to you, I gather that the data that you're collecting, all of the work and the research, seems to be directed at getting information as to whether to grant a permit prospectively. Should your wells and your testing and the data you're accumulating say that an existing set of wells or an existing group of wells is causing the contamination and all the other stuff in the mission statement that you don't want to have happen, do you have statutory or regulatory authority to go back and say to the existing user, cut back, stop?
We do, yes.
We do.
Our authority is not granted forever. These appropriations are still annual authorizations that end up being, you still have to pay your fee, you have to address, or you have to comply with the permit conditions, and all of our permits now say, at any time that we determine that this permit is no longer sustainable, your permit may be modified, amended, and or revoked. Something in that manner, right?
How do you determine whether it's no longer sustainable?
So in the Straight River Groundwater Management Area, that's why we have it's still a pilot area to start to evaluate the cumulative impacts there. We want to make sure that we look at all of the wells together and how that's affecting the impacts, and then start to relay directly back to what those sources of the impact may be to determine what it would take to roll back water use, I guess. So essentially we need to find a source of the problem. And it may not be that one new well, it's a collection, accumulation of all those wells. So because of riparian allowances, riparian rights in the state to get water below your parcel, and we don't have we don't just stop giving permits, or that hasn't been the practice at this point. It may end up being that the group of permits that are causing the problem may have water reduced so that it's no longer an impact. We have a lot of authority to modify permits, and the groundwater management areas are established so that we can start to look at that problem cumulatively and address it cumulatively. So part of the 5-year plan is also to look at all of the permits, make them compliant with the existing conditions, and modify them if need be.
Even if they're outside the groundwater
No,
management?
in the groundwater management area right now, again, this is why we're using that area to pilot this. So yes, if you're in the Hubbard Plain, that may be something we do in the future. The other areas in the state I talked about, like Little Rock Creek, doesn't have a groundwater management area, but they are doing a very similar strategy there to address cumulative use, and they're doing it without the groundwater management area authority. They're doing it within our own authority to still look at all those permits collectively and determine what the impact is, and then address it with potentially a reduction in volume or rate. It could be, in these cases, if it's irrigation, the farmers may get creative again, right? They may say, I get 20 million, or say I get 80 million gallons for 3 years, or 40 million gallons, and I want 30 million, 30 million, 30 million, then I'm going to do 0 or something. They may put crops in there. They're one they need 8 inches on, and then they have a 2-inch or a 3-inch or 4-inch crop. So there is opportunities in which we start talking about how does water allocated. And we want to work, we want to work with those appropriators to make sure that we're not dictating necessarily how they farm, right? I mean, that's not, we don't want to get into the idea of telling farmers how they should be farming, but we want to give them information so they can make decisions on that operation so that they can move forward with a business plan. I think the gentleman over there.
Thank you for stopping the presentation to fix your graphics, because they're fantastic, Darrin. So I have 2 questions. One, is your PowerPoint available to the public?
It can be, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I guess I'll put it in a PDF and they can put it on the deal.
I can email you for it?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. The 100 million gallons that the city of Park Rapids saved with their conservation measures, what happened to that 100 million gallons? Does it get reappropriated to other users?
We have not determined a volume of water that is a sustainable removal out of that system at this point. So essentially, that water we're talking about was upgraded into the city wells. I think there's a half a dozen pivots in that area, 7, I guess, pivots in that area. That area just doesn't have that water removed from it anymore. So there was some other, it does get a little more complicated. Dean can talk to you about that, but we're not managing volumes. Maybe in the future there'll be some of that, but right now we don't have, say, a cap on the volume of water that can be removed.
Thank you.
Darrin, what type of, in light of the more comprehensive analysis that you do when somebody applies for a new permit, what type of reduction, if any, are you seeing in applications for new wells?
We're not really tracking who, so I guess I could probably look at how many people put in for a preliminary well review and didn't put an application in. It's probably still far more people who move forward than who don't. But other farmers or dairy operations, for example, may call us and just get that information over the phone even before doing it. But we do know that it has been beneficial. I don't have a number on it though.
Do the big individual wells do water level studies? Do they keep track of the water level in their well?
It's not normally a smart idea to take a water level in the well that you're pumping from. There can be some valuable data. We do have monitoring conditions on a number of people's wells. They had to put a new well in, and that's what they measure, some distance away from their production well. So that's better data under most cases for us.
They don't have a start of the season water level.
Oh yeah, but they may. We're not normally, again, requiring that, but our idea is that we have enough wells out there that we can really start to understand, monitoring wells that are under our control, that we can start to understand it. What's also not on there is the city has a number of monitoring wells, the plant has a number of monitoring wells that are also available for us to use and understand that what the water levels are, how they're changing out there.
Another thing with that is that the SWCD does go and monitor 42 different wells all around the county too that gets fed into some of that, not just Straight River, but we're doing monitoring on those.
Yeah, so even in the Pineland Sands area, I think we put at least a dozen wells right here that we didn't have. And that was once we started to get more, we were concerned about what was going on. The first thing we said, we don't have a lot of good data here. We need to put some wells out there. So we have a new network of wells out in that area, the county and the geographic area here. So,
Is the Pineland Sands then considered a groundwater management area now?
it is not. The Pineland Sands, again, is a geographic area that was delineated and is based on similar features out there, but even along this location, somebody decided to figure out just cut it off there. So
And the reason I asked in an earlier slide was some of the rules that you're trying to follow is protecting the ecosystems. And as you said, people are calling and saying you're ripping all the trees out. There is no ecosystem out there anymore. It's dirt.
and there's been interest, so one of the realities is we don't have a lot of control over that landscape alteration. Even with irrigation, we do know that it's likely why that forest was removed. But the reality is that if they didn't want to put irrigation in, they could still have removed the whole thing. They maybe could have put a gravel pit in. They could have done a number of things, right? But it's still the ability to get water is what's driving that landscape change. So it's pretty clear the water appropriation permits is going to have some connection there. But in the more recently here, we've had folks, probably some of you folks in the room approaching local governments, counties in particular, to start looking at county zoning, requiring permits or conditional use permits for some of those changes. That's new, right? It hasn't happened yet, but there's people considering it, right? That, what's another control? If we don't want to see certain activities out there on the landscape, planning and zoning can have a real profound impact out there and saying we're going to put irrigation here or not there, or it could be as simple as limiting densities of these systems out there on that landscape. One section. You could get creative. There is people looking at that right now, but nobody that I am familiar with has addressed it.
With all of the irrigation that's being done, the increased number of irrigated acres that are out there, and the increased amount of fertilizers and pesticides, is anyone doing any kind of study regarding health changes that are within our area? I mean, there are rumors afloat that, people in one area can't even drink their water anymore, increased incidences of different types of cancers. Is there anything that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of anybody. Ryan, Julie.
I couldn't hear all of it.
The question was concerns about groundwater contamination and linkage to health, your health. Cancer, increased rates, or something like that. If there's any studies here being done locally on areas where we have some of this high contamination, higher levels.
No, I don't know anything.
Doesn't sound. Do you have a question or maybe something to add to it?
No, I'm just trying to ask you a question.
Okay, get your hand up early. Okay, apologize. Maybe if you want to email me, I could try to see if I'm aware of it, but I got my pulse on this pretty well, so I'm not familiar with anything at this point.
The Department of Ag does have, I think, 6 wells kind of in the agricultural belt that they do measure, the 132 or whatever pesticides, herbicides, that they do. And you can go on their website and find it, but it's kind of a bunch of digging and stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not sure any of that's linked to health right at this point at least, so I can take your question real quick. Does anybody got questions for George here too? Because he's up front.
Nice and comfortable.
I read the Nolte article the other day.
Yep.
It was good, but I have one question or one confusion. If they own the land and were to get a permit, and that's still in review, I believe, the environmental review.
Permit decisions are on hold until environmental assessment is complete.
And if they own the land and then cash rent it to somebody else, can the cash renter plant whatever they want or use any volume they want, or does it all go back to the permitted piece that Nolte has?
So the question is, and I think I'll probably put this out to any permitted operation, because Nolte's are They're reviewing it as a landowner who has their 3 permit applications under review right now, but the question really relates to anybody who has a permit out there, and if somebody else comes in to cash lease it, cash rent it, whatever it may be. It's very common that a permittee who is the landowner, it's not the agent, it's not the leasee, the permittee is the landowner. That landowner may be in Iowa, California, who knows where, and there may be a local agent that's administering it. The responsibility still comes down to that landowner who's the permittee. If that permittee comes into a contract agreement with another landowner, the DNR rarely if ever gets involved with that. They still have to adhere to the permit conditions of the original permit though, or of that permit. It's the permittee's responsibility to make sure that their leasee is adhering to that permit, and if they come into violation of it, then it's the DNR's still responsibility to make sure that that's addressed. And we may do that with that farmer, that operator, or the permittee together.
Okay, thank you.
How many groundwater management areas are in the state of Minnesota? And are they all being studied and give data information on all of them as you are doing with the local one here?
Yeah, so part of the groundwater management areas was to try to be consistent. So we have a similar plan, a similar format, similar action items about addressing these things. So they are all following the same program. We may have more data in one location versus another, but the 3 locations are the northeast metros. This is the White Bear Lake, Woodbury area. That's one groundwater management area that's primarily focused on water supply wells. These are large city wells in the ground. The second location is Bonanza Valley, Stearns County, either way, a couple other counties to the south of here quite a bit, and I think Bruton Belgrade is in there. Very similar to the Straight River, but more irrigation, a lot more appropriators in that area, and again another complicated, similar but still complicated a system over there. But they would be real similar to what we're doing up here.
Only 3 of them?
Only 3 right now. So these are pilot groundwater management areas. The plan was a pilot. This no longer, it is now a implementation. We're implementing the plan. So we spent many meetings in this exact room going through the plan. It was actually 15 meetings, I think, before we got to the final conclusions of it. And the groundwater management area is a DNR plan. It's the actions we need to take to ensure the sustainability of that resource. We ask for assistance, we look for partnerships, and we try to do all of that as well. But again, the buck lands with us in regards to the implementation of that plan.
In time, will that cover the state of Minnesota?
There may be more areas, yeah, right? I mean, I think that one of the first maps I showed you, there was, a lot of these areas are focused groundwater management areas. But if you look at the metropolitan areas, when you start talking about supply, even, they're starting to make their supply more diverse. Instead of just going with the groundwater, let's start using surface water as well. And then if the surface water is low, they'll start going back to the groundwater and being more diverse with their water availability.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we got lots of questions yet, so feel free if you guys got to get going. It doesn't hurt my feeling. And if anybody's got a question for George, he is sitting right here.
Why is it contamination of the water as important for resource management of water?
It is as important. I wouldn't say that it's less important. What I'm saying, the DNR's, our authority is much more within the groundwater quantity end of it. You would want to talk to the Department of Ag folks in the back, Ryan and Kim there, because their primary responsibility is again enshrined in statute 103G or 103H, I believe, and in that manner in which they're responsible to address these, what is the primary contaminant in this area, fertilizers and pesticides. So, but the DNR is concerned about high nitrates in the trout stream. How is that affecting the critters in there as well, right? So we're, as part of that ecological end of it that's important to us, we're monitoring temperature in the streams, and we're monitoring impacts to insects and critters and fish and all of that sort. So it's definitely more than just quantity.
The water appropriation permits that the DNR has right around the drinking water supply management area for Park Rapids, do those get any special consideration more than others now that the city is showing that the new well is sampling tritium?
That I don't know. You might want to talk to Dean about it a little bit more. We work directly with the city and those farmers as part of their wellhead protection plan to make sure that, again, the Department of Health, and it's a collective of agencies that do it. I'm not familiar with the tritium issue at this point, I guess, enough. But it would probably be a good idea to talk to Dean. And if the city comes up with concerns, they are going to bring it to us. And if it comes down to water appropriation as a solution to help address it, I would assume that that's going to be on it's an option.
We don't want to abuse the room.
Have, with the work that's been done so far, are there any areas where the taking of water has exceeded the sustainability? And if it has, have you reduced the take on any wells?
We have not in this, so right now we're still determining those sustainability thresholds across the state in these areas of high use. So we have not made that determination yet, but we do know there's areas that have greatly reduced the amount of water in streams in particular that may be past that sustainability threshold. We're seeing that in maybe some of the areas like where we're doing more of that modeling at this point with the Cold Spring area and the Little Rock Creek. But up here, we haven't quite made that direct connection. But again, we do know that the water appropriation that's occurring in this geographic area is reducing the discharge to our features, our streams, our wetlands, and our lakes. How much is it? And if it is too much, we'll have to determine how we roll that water use back. So no, we haven't done that yet.